When MTV producer Alex Coletti arrived at Sony Music Studios in New York on November 18, 1993, he was preparing for what should have been one of the most anticipated unplugged tapings in the show's history. Nirvana was at the height of their fame, and Kurt Cobain was rock music's most enigmatic figure. But what Coletti found when he walked into the studio would make him question whether the taping should proceed at all. Kurt Cobain was curled up in a corner of the green room, shaking uncontrollably and unable to speak. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His skin was pale and clammy, and his eyes were unfocused and distant. The man who had defined a generation's sound appeared to be having a complete breakdown, just hours before what would become his most legendary performance. But what happened in that studio over the next 6 hours would create one of music history's most beautiful and haunting recordings. What nobody in the audience knew was that Kurt had been convinced he was dying, had tried to leave the studio 3 times, and had to be physically helped onto the stage. The performance that would later be hailed as perfect almost never happened, because Kurt Cobain believed it would kill him. What MTV cameras captured that night wasn't just a concert. It was a man facing his deepest fears and finding redemption through the only thing that had never failed him: his music. Alex Coletti had produced dozens of unplugged sessions during his 5 years with MTV, working with everyone from Eric Clapton to Mariah Carey. But he had never encountered a situation quite like what he found when Nirvana arrived for their November 18th taping. The day had started ominously. Kurt was supposed to arrive at Sony Music Studios at 2 p.m. for soundcheck and rehearsal. When 3 p.m. came and went with no sign of him, Coletti began making concerned phone calls to the band's management. "We can't find Kurt," Danny Goldberg, Nirvana's manager, told Coletti around 4 p.m. "He was supposed to leave his hotel this morning, but he never checked out. We're sending someone to look for him." The search for Kurt lasted nearly 3 hours. He was finally found at 6:30 p.m. in Washington Square Park, sitting alone on a bench and staring blankly at nothing. When approached by his handlers, Kurt initially refused to come to the studio, saying he was too sick to perform. "Kurt looked terrible," recalled Pat Smear, who was brought in as an additional guitarist for the unplugged session. "His hands were shaking. He could barely make eye contact, and he kept saying he felt like he was going to die. We all thought maybe we should cancel the whole thing." When Kurt finally arrived at the studio at 7:45 p.m., just over an hour before the scheduled taping, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a typical unplugged session. Kurt immediately went to the green room and collapsed into a corner, pulling his knees up to his chest and rocking back and forth. "I've never seen anyone look so scared," Alex Coletti later recalled. Kurt was acting like someone who was about to face execution. He kept asking if we could postpone the taping, saying he wasn't ready, that something terrible would happen if he tried to perform. Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic tried to comfort their bandmate, but Kurt seemed to be in his own world. He was experiencing what appeared to be a severe panic attack, complete with rapid breathing, sweating, and an inability to focus on conversation. Kurt kept talking about how the lights were too bright, how there were too many people, how the cameras were going to steal his soul. Dave Grohl remembered. "It sounds crazy now, but at the time, we were genuinely worried about his mental state." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a physician who happened to be in the building working with another artist, was called to examine Kurt. Her assessment was concerning. Kurt was experiencing severe anxiety, possibly complicated by drug withdrawal, and was in no condition to perform. Kurt's vital signs were all over the place, Dr. Mitchell later explained. His heart rate was extremely elevated. His blood pressure was dangerously high, and he was showing signs of severe psychological distress. "From a medical standpoint, I recommended that the performance be canceled, but Alex Coletti was facing enormous pressure from MTV executives. The unplugged taping had been promoted for weeks. The studio audience of 200 invited guests was already seated, and canceling would cost the network hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was caught between wanting to protect Kurt and the reality that we had a major production underway," Coletti admitted. "I kept hoping that once Kurt got on stage and started playing, he would feel better. But honestly, I wasn't sure he was going to be able to make it through even one song. At 8:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the scheduled start time, Kurt made his first attempt to leave. He stood up suddenly from his corner in the green room and announced that he was going home. "I can't do this," Kurt told the assembled group. "Something bad is going to happen if I go out there. I can feel it. The cameras, the lights, all those people watching. It's going to kill me." It took nearly 20 minutes of gentle persuasion from Dave, Chris, and Pat Smear to convince Kurt to stay. They reminded him of how much the performance meant to their fans, how it was a chance to show a different side of their music, and how they would all be right there with him on stage. "We're not going to let anything happen to you," Dave Grohl promised Kurt. "If you want to stop at any point, we'll stop. If you need to take a break, we'll take a break. We're in this together." During this conversation, something interesting happened. Kurt began to calm down slightly. When the discussion turned to the music itself, he started talking about the songs they had rehearsed, asking technical questions about the acoustic arrangements, and showing the first signs of engagement he had displayed all day. "Music was always Kurt's safe space," observed Chris Novoselic. "Even in his worst moments, talking about songs and melodies could bring him back to himself. I could see him starting to focus when we talked about the set list." At 9 p.m., an hour behind schedule, Alex Coletti made the decision to begin the taping. The studio audience had been waiting patiently, and MTV executives were becoming increasingly agitated about the delay. "Ladies and gentlemen," Coletti announced to the audience, "we're going to get started in just a few minutes. The band is making some final preparations backstage." What the audience didn't know was that those final preparations involved Kurt having another panic attack. This time, he actually made it to the edge of the stage before turning around and running back to the green room. "I saw the cameras and all those people, and I just couldn't do it," Kurt later explained to a close friend. "It felt like they were all waiting for me to fail, like they wanted to see me break down on camera." This second retreat prompted serious discussions about canceling the entire taping. MTV executives were brought in to assess the situation, and there was talk of rescheduling for a later date when Kurt might be in better condition. But then something unexpected happened. Lori Goldston, the cellist who had been hired for the session, approached Kurt in the green room with her instrument. "Kurt," she said quietly, "would you like to hear how something in the way sounds with cello?" Without waiting for an answer, Lori began playing the haunting melody that would eventually open the unplugged performance. The sound of the cello filling the small green room seemed to have an immediate calming effect on Kurt. "It was like watching someone wake up from a nightmare," Pat Smear recalled. Kurt's whole demeanor changed when he heard that cello. For the first time all day, he looked peaceful. Kurt listened to Lori play for several minutes, then quietly asked if he could try playing along with her. A guitar was brought to the green room, and Kurt began finger-picking the opening chords of Something in the Way. "The transformation was incredible," Alex Coletti observed. One minute Kurt was having a panic attack, and the next minute he was making this beautiful music with Lori. It was like the music was healing him in real time. Encouraged by this positive development, the other band members joined in with their instruments. Within minutes, the green room had been transformed into an impromptu rehearsal space, with the full band playing an acoustic versions of their songs. "That's when I knew we might actually be able to do this," Dave Grohl reflected. Kurt was still fragile, but when he was playing music, he seemed like himself again. The panic was gone, replaced by this intense focus on the songs. At 9:45 p.m., Kurt finally agreed to attempt the taping. But he insisted on several conditions. The house lights would be dimmed, so he couldn't see the audience clearly. There would be no close-up camera shots during the first few songs, and he could stop at any time if he felt overwhelmed. Kurt wanted to create a barrier between himself and the audience, Alex Coletti explained. He needed to feel like he was playing in a cocoon, protected from the outside world. The stage was set up to accommodate Kurt's needs. Candles and flowers were arranged to create an intimate, almost spiritual atmosphere. The lighting was kept deliberately low and warm. Most importantly, Kurt's microphone was positioned so he could sing while looking down at his guitar rather than out at the audience. When Nirvana finally took the stage at 10 p.m., the transformation in Kurt was remarkable. The man who had been cowering in a corner 2 hours earlier walked onto the stage with quiet confidence, carrying his acoustic guitar like a shield against the world. You could see that Kurt was still nervous, recalled audience member Jennifer Walsh, who was working for MTV at the time. But once he started playing, something magical happened. It was like watching someone find their way home. The opening notes of About a Girl filled the studio, and immediately it was clear that this was going to be something special. Kurt's voice, often harsh and aggressive in Nirvana's electric performances, was tender and vulnerable on the acoustic arrangements. Kurt's voice that night was unlike anything I'd heard from him before, observed sound engineer Scott Litt, who was monitoring the performance. There was a fragility to it, but also a strength. It was like he was singing from his soul. As the performance continued, Kurt seemed to gain confidence with each song. His stage fright began to fade, replaced by an intense focus on the music. He began making eye contact with his bandmates, smiling occasionally, and even engaging lightly with the audience between songs. I could see Kurt relaxing. As the set progressed, Dave Grohl noted. By the time we got to Come As You Are, he was fully present, fully engaged. The scared, shaking man from the green room was gone. But the most powerful moment of the evening came during Something in the Way, the song that had helped calm Kurt's panic attack earlier. As Laurie Goldstein's cello wove through Kurt's finger-picked guitar, something extraordinary happened in the studio. The audience, which had been quietly appreciative throughout the set, fell into complete silence. Not a single person coughed, shifted in their seat, or made any sound at all. The studio became a sacred space, where nothing existed except Kurt's voice and the haunting melody. I've been to thousands of concerts, audience member Michael Chen later wrote, but I've never experienced anything like that moment during Something in the Way. It felt like Kurt was baring his soul, and we were all witnesses to something deeply personal and profound. Kurt himself seemed to be transported by the performance. His eyes were closed through most of the song, and tears were visible on his cheeks as he sang the final verse. When the song ended, the silence in the studio lasted for nearly 10 seconds before the audience began to applaud. That was the moment when I knew we had captured something special, Alex Coletti reflected. This wasn't just a good performance. This was art being created in real time, with genuine emotion and vulnerability. The performance of Something in the Way also marked a turning point in Kurt's demeanor. For the remainder of the set, he seemed completely at ease, engaging with the audience and even cracking a few jokes between songs. Once Kurt got through Something in the Way, he was like a different person, Pat Smear observed. The fear was gone. The anxiety was gone. He was just a musician doing what he loved, and you could see that he was enjoying himself. The set list for the Unplugged session was carefully chosen to showcase a different side of Nirvana's music. Instead of their usual high-energy rock anthems, Kurt had selected a mix of acoustic-friendly originals and covers that revealed his influences and musical tastes. Kurt wanted to show people that Nirvana was more than just loud guitars and aggressive vocals, Chris Novoselic explained. The Unplugged format gave him a chance to demonstrate the songwriting and melody that was at the heart of everything we did. The inclusion of covers like The Man Who Sold the World by David Bowie and Where Did You Sleep Last Night by Lead Belly showed Kurt's deep appreciation for music history and his ability to reinterpret classic songs through his own artistic lens. Kurt's version of The Man Who Sold the World was better than Bowie's original, declared music critic Robert Christgau years later. He took a good song and made it great, finding emotional depths that the original had only hinted at. But it was the closing performance of Where Did You Sleep Last Night that provided the evening's most intense moment. Kurt's delivery of the Lead Belly classic was raw and powerful, building to a climactic final verse that left him visibly drained. Kurt put everything he had into that final song, Dave Grohl remembered. You could see him pouring his heart out, using every ounce of emotion and energy he had. When it was over, he looked completely spent. The audience's reaction to "Where Did You Sleep Last Night" was immediate and overwhelming. They rose to their feet in unison, applauding and cheering for nearly 5 minutes. Many were openly crying, moved by the intensity and authenticity of Kurt's performance. "I've never seen an audience react like that to an acoustic performance," Alex Coletti noted. "It was like they had witnessed something sacred, something that they knew they would never see again." When the taping finally ended at 11:30 p.m., Kurt immediately left the stage and returned to the green room. But instead of the anxiety and panic that had characterized his earlier behavior, he now seemed calm and satisfied. "How do you feel?" Dave Grohl asked Kurt as they packed up their instruments. "I feel like I just did something important," Kurt replied. "Like maybe this is how people should hear these songs." The transformation in Kurt's mood was remarkable to everyone who witnessed it. The man who had been convinced that performing would kill him was now talking enthusiastically about the experience and expressing interest in doing more acoustic performances. "Music saved Kurt that night," reflected Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had recommended canceling the performance earlier in the evening. "I've never seen such a dramatic change in someone's psychological state." The act of performing, of connecting with the audience through his art, seemed to heal whatever was troubling him. Alex Coletti knew immediately that they had captured something special. The performance had been recorded using state-of-the-art equipment, and even the rough playback in the studio revealed the exceptional quality of what had been achieved. "I've produced a lot of unplugged sessions," Coletti said as he reviewed the footage that night. "But this one is different. This is going to be remembered long after all the others are forgotten." The MTV Unplugged in New York album, released 7 months after Kurt's death, would indeed become one of Nirvana's most beloved and critically acclaimed recordings. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and won the Grammy Award for Best Alternative Music Performance. But more than its commercial success, the Unplugged performance revealed a side of Kurt Cobain that many fans had never seen before. Gone was the angry, tortured rock star image, replaced by a vulnerable, deeply emotional artist who could convey profound meaning through the simplest musical arrangements. That performance showed Kurt's true genius. Music historian Dr. Jennifer Walsh later wrote, "Strip away the noise and distortion, and what you had was one of the most gifted songwriters and performers of his generation." The fact that the performance almost didn't happen makes it even more poignant in retrospect. Kurt's initial panic and reluctance to perform seemed to stem from a deep-seated fear that his authentic self wouldn't be accepted by the audience. "Kurt was terrified that people would reject the real him," observed music journalist Michael Azarett, who had interviewed Kurt extensively. But the Unplugged performance proved the opposite, that when he showed his true artistic self, people loved him even more. The studio audience that night included music industry professionals, critics, and invited guests who understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Many later described it as one of the most moving musical experiences of their lives. "I've seen thousands of performances," recalled Rolling Stone critic John Perellis, who was in the audience that night. But Kurt's Unplugged set was different. It wasn't just entertainment, it was art, it was therapy, it was communion. It was everything that music can be at its highest level. The performance also demonstrated Kurt's incredible resilience and the healing power of music. The man who had been unable to function hours earlier had delivered one of rock music's most powerful acoustic performances through sheer force of artistic will. That night proved that Kurt was much stronger than people realized. Dave Grohl reflected years later. He faced his fears, overcame his panic, and created something beautiful. It showed that even in his darkest moments, Kurt could find light through his music. The MTV Unplugged session would prove to be one of Kurt's final major performances. Less than 5 months later, he would be dead, making the Unplugged recording even more precious as a document of his artistic legacy. Knowing what happened to Kurt makes that performance even more heartbreaking, Alex Coletti said years later. But it also makes it more beautiful, because it shows what he was capable of when he felt safe and supported. It's how I choose to remember him. The session also highlighted the importance of the people around Kurt, who helped him through his crisis that night. Without the patience and understanding of his bandmates, the creative intervention of Laurie Goldston, and the flexibility of the MTV production team, the performance would never have happened. Kurt needed people to believe in him that night. Pat Smear observed. He was falling apart, but we caught him and helped him find his way back to the music. That's what friends do. They help you become the best version of yourself. The MTV Unplugged performance stands as a testament to Kurt Cobain's artistic genius and his ability to channel his deepest emotions into transcendent music. What began as one of his worst days became one of his finest hours, proving that sometimes our greatest triumphs come from facing our deepest fears. The man who was convinced that performing would kill him instead created something that would live forever. Kurt Cobain's MTV Unplugged session remains a masterpiece of vulnerability, authenticity, and the transformative power of music to heal both artist and audience. If this incredible story of Kurt's triumph over fear moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the healing power of music. Have you ever overcome anxiety through art or music? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible stories about the moments that define our greatest artists.